Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Look, we're heading into what I think is going to be the best weekend of the Premier League season so far, simply because, well, you know, we can't lose. Can't lose this weekend. No way. Not even if we tried. There is no football. There is an interlull. Perhaps it has come at just the right time. It allows everybody to take a step backwards, take stock. We can calm our own nerves as fans. The club can get some players back from injury. They can get some of the new players in. Of course, there was a deadline day signing. Get a few training sessions in. Maybe do a bit of shooting practice. And the lads will be like, what is this? And the instruction is, well, look, propel this round thing between those sticks and into the net. They're like, it's incredible. We've never seen this before. What an innovation. Get a bit of that done and we're all set for Norwich and everything goes in the right direction again. Yes, I can hear you ask the question, am I on drugs? The answer, of course, is I wish I was. But look, you know, I need to find some sliver of optimism, some suggestion that we can get things back on track. Now, this show is a bit of a bumper show, so we're going to get straight into it. Later on, we're going straight through that transfer window with insight into the roles of Edu, Mikel Arteta, the board, the incoming deals, the outgoing deals, and lots more with David Ornstein from The Athletic, so stay tuned for that. But first, joining me to talk about the deadline day signing of Japan international Takehiro Tomiyasu, what kind of a player he is, what he'll bring to the team, and some thoughts on the window overall. I'm delighted to welcome to the show Phil Costa. Hello, Phil.
Hey, Andrew. How's it going?
It's going all right. Those who don't know or who aren't members on Patreon, we've been doing new player signings or podcasts every time we've made a new signing. So we've been doing that all summer. Because of the timing of this one, we didn't get a chance to do it on Patreon, but we're doing it now. So it's clear, Phil, isn't it, that Arsenal have needed to do something about the right-back position for the whole summer. And what happened in the first 3 games of the season really brought that into sharp focus.
Yeah, I mean, it was always kind of lingering in the background. But maybe they thought they could get by with Chambers and maybe Cedric or even Ainsley Maitland-Niles if he was, you know, coming back in from the cold. But then, like you said, the first 3 games just went, oh, okay, we definitely need to do something now. And I know they left it until deadline day, but I'm sure they, you know, after Chelsea and City were like, right, we need to get something done now. And I'm sure they kicked things into gear. So, yeah, it was very pressing for me personally, and I'm sure it was for the club. And yeah, they brought Tomiyasu in, and I'm, you know, generally quite happy with the signing.
He fits into the age profile, obviously, and that's something, you know, that's been spoken about at length, is the age profile of the players that we've brought in so far this summer. So he's 22 years of age, maybe not the traditional physique of a right back, and I think there's an element of versatility to his defensive capabilities, if you like. He has played at centre half as well. So if people were looking for a sort of facsimile of Kieran Tierney, a right-sided Tierney, if you like, he's not really that, is he? He fits more into this idea that the right back in the system that Mikel Arteta plays tucks in a bit and you know, out of possession, or in possession rather, Arsenal have this back 3 shape, even if ostensibly they're not always set up with a back 3 in the team lineup.
No, that's it. I mean, it's quite interesting to see who he's been linked with throughout the summer, actually, because he was very heavily linked with Atalanta, who play 3 at the back, and Spurs. I know they play a 4 now under Nuno, which is quite surprising, but they have Reguilon on the other side, who's very much in that kind of Tierney mould, who's like sort of up and down, flying into the box, coming back. And, you know, I could see the logic behind their interest in Tomiyasu, because in a similar fashion to us, he would be kind of the right back, centre back, you know, forming a kind of back 3 when they attack and in possession. So, you know, you're bang on, I think, in terms of what Mikel Arteta wants to do. And to a lesser extent, we have kind of seen it with Callum Chambers, but I think the idea was to improve on him. But yeah, like you said, he's kind of a strange profile, both physically and technically, because he's quite tall. You know, there's not many right backs you see that are 6'2", 6 feet 2 inches tall. So I think he's coming in kind of very much with that role in mind to kind of be the right back on paper, but in terms of what we see on the pitch, it will very much be him tucking in and Tierney bombing on.
I suppose the question that I have before we talk about some of his strengths and weaknesses is quite how, I mean, we're looking for somebody, I suppose, to be not necessarily the partner for Ben White, because if you're looking at a back four and Ben White is playing as a centre half, you're looking at him and Gabriel forming a partnership, but the partnerships are important on both sides. The player outside you is important as the player inside you. So are there elements of his profile that seem to complement Ben White? We know that Ben White likes to carry the ball and go forward with it quite a bit, so that leaves a gap. Is his natural tendency, or his ability rather, to play as a central defender a useful aspect when it comes to slotting him in alongside Ben White?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wrote in the profile piece that he's very much a defender who loves to defend. And I think it's important to note that, you know, with Tierney, I mean, the ideal left centre-back that we all see in our minds is Gabriel. And you spoke about Ben White potentially leaving gaps, but Tierney will do the same. But with Gabriel, I kind of trust him physically enough to be able to kind of take that space as well as his own space. You know, he's a tall guy, he's very quick, and I kind of trust him enough to be able to handle it himself when Tierney comes forward. But I'm just, you know, there's one or two reservations about Ben White physically yet. Maybe he's not, you know, fully developed yet. We saw him struggle in the air against Ivan Toney, and like you said, if he goes on one of those runs upfield, that gap, you know, it needs to be filled by somebody. And I think Tomiyasu has kind of the natural inclination to kind of set back, you know, fill in, no fuss, just give me that space, and he can do it. So he can very much be that kind of central defender if we need him to be. And I think his sort of skill set very much complements Ben White in that sense, because, you know, Bologna are not really an attacking side by any stretch, but him as a player, his sort of natural tendencies will not take him forward. He's very much, I will stay here on the touchline if you need me, but in terms of his sort of profile and what he offers to the side in terms of aerial duels, tackles, he's very much defensively inclined, and I think that could suit Ben White a lot, actually, even if I don't agree with the notion that we've brought Tomiyasu in to babysit him.
Well, yeah, I'd agree with that. The strengths that he has, his size makes him a really good aerial presence, and, you know, the stats bear that out. Arsenal have struggled from set pieces so far this season, so adding a player of some height and presence really feels like a useful thing, even if we're looking at a right back ostensibly to do a little bit more than that, but giving us some more presence from set pieces, from corners as we're defending is a good thing. And in the air, he really is very good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite strange because his first season in Italy, when he played primarily as a centre-back, his aerial duel numbers, were fairly average. And I'm not sure what happened last season, but they almost more than doubled. And yeah, like as you mentioned, his size, his physique, he's very kind of noticeable on the pitch. And, you know, having watched a bit of film, it's always his head that seems to be on the end of the ball. I'm not sure if he has this, you know, crazy ability to read the play or just know where the ball's going to be, but it's always his head there flicking them on or heading away. And I think definitely we just needed a bit of size and authority in there, because, you know, I don't want to go into the typical cliches about Arsenal being soft, but, you know, we do kind of lack some presence and size in both boxes. And I think adding him for sure will be a big bonus for us. And yeah, I think he can just give us some commitment, some bravery in times when we perhaps lack it.
What about his ability on the ball? In terms of his passing, in terms of what he might contribute to the build-up going forward. I mean, one of the aspects I think that we're looking at this summer is how are we going to improve from an offensive point of view? How are we going to provide variety in our attack? And we can all see and have seen the left-sided bias that exists when you've got Kieran Tierney in the team. We get him overlapped, we get crosses in, etc., etc. But there is a whole other side of the pitch that you can use for attacking, whether it's Nicolas Pepe out there, whether it's Bukayo Saka out there. And I do think the arrival of Martin Odegaard gives us a bit more balance in terms of how we attack, because he does favour a little bit that right-hand side, at least when it comes to where he picks up the ball. So if we're looking for Tomiyasu to contribute in that area, what are your thoughts in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think his distribution will surprise a lot of people, to be honest. We spoke before about Bologna being quite conservative, but in terms of their side and their squad, last season he was second for progressive passes and for passes into the final third. So, I think his attacking numbers, people would have seen the little radars and the charts and think, oh, there's not really much going on here. But I think that's very much through design as opposed to his limitations. And we spoke about Nuno Tavares potentially being very comfortable on his weaker side. Watch a YouTube compilation of Tomiyasu and you can see him pinging balls with both feet with ease. It looks very natural. I'm not saying he's Santi Cazorla, but 40, 50-yard diagonals, he looks very natural. He can even bring out the ball on his left side because he's played at left centre back before, and he's got this nice habit of bringing the ball out slightly. Not like Ben White, but he can bring it out, and then he just dinks these little balls into the channel, and I think that could really help potentially Nicola Pepe if we really need to get him off that right touch line. And I think having Odegaard there, like you mentioned, but also Tomiyasu, who can just kind of clip balls in behind, could really help us this season. I think we'll be seeing a lot of it. So in terms of his distribution, don't be fooled by the numbers, because I think if you watch him, you can see him is very comfortable. He can look clunky at times maybe, but I think that's just down to his size. And not down to his technique, because I think he's very technically accomplished, and I think he will surprise people next year.
Yeah.
Or this year.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this year. That would be handy.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben White as well is another player who's comfortable pinging the ball with both feet, which I think is an interesting aspect of what we've done. Whether that's deliberate or not, I'm not quite sure. And I think maybe more footballers should be capable with their so-called wrong foot than they actually are. We'll wait and see what that helps us do in defence and as we go forward and as the game starts coming thick and fast again. I mean, what do we know about his pace? He seems to be pretty quick from what I've seen. Not lightning or anything like that, but when you're a defender, recovery pace is important in the modern game because of the way that teams play and because you can end up with space behind you. Is like, you wouldn't say, for example, that Callum Chambers is the quickest player on earth. Is that going to be an issue for him in the Premier League?
No, not for me. I mean, the thing with Callum Chambers is I think he's very strong technically, but he doesn't trust his body. He does not want people running at him. He can't move his feet quickly. When he's turned, it's pretty much good night. I mean, we saw even with Grealish the other day, he wanted none of that. Was not interested at all. And I think with Tomiyasu, despite his size, he's a lot more agile. He can move his feet quickly, and he loves showing players to the byline because he backs himself. Things coming inside, things get a bit more complicated. I don't think he's particularly comfortable showing players inside, but I think his natural tendency is to take them down to the byline, and he really backs himself, whether it's matching them for pace or just giving them a little arm just to get his body on side. I think if you watch him, his defending is very much textbook. I mean, it's he's been coached very well. Everything is what you learned as a kid. Show him down the line, take him away from goal. His body is naturally very crouched. His kind of defensive stance, whereas Chambers is very upright all the time.
Yeah.
But if you're lower down to the ground, it gives you more, ability to change your pace and move inside or outside. And I just think he'll offer us a lot more security in that sense, because he feels like more of a natural player that's able to cover distances. And, having watched him, I've got no real issue with his pace, because, Serie A has a fair, selection of pacey wingers. And I think against Juventus in particular, even though Bologna lost 4-1 on the day, I think he was very good against Juan Cuadrado. There were more clips I've watched of him, against Gervinho, and he did not give him a single problem. I know he's become a bit of a meme, but in Italy, he's been, fairly good. So, I think in terms of his defending, he trusts his body, which is already a huge tick. But in terms of his technique and how he defends, it's not just his body, but when he goes, when he stays, how he interprets the space to cover. I think he's very intelligent. And again, it kind of fits into what we were saying before about him being that kind of right back, right centre back hybrid, as opposed to the more Kieran Tierney swashbuckling fullback.
Well, look, he's the latest really quite interesting player that we've brought in this summer. 6 players in, and I suppose they're interesting because we really haven't seen an awful lot of them so far this season, and we're all hoping that they can develop and they can grow. So just before we finish this up, Phil, some thoughts on the transfer window in general based on what we've done, I suppose more from an incoming point of view than an outgoing point of view, because I'm not sure there's a huge amount of discussion there, or we're not going to say anything that hasn't already been said. But after the opening 3 games of the season, which have been, an unmitigated disaster, there's no other way of putting it from an Arsenal perspective. How do you see the shape of the squad right now? So Arsenal have brought in a goalkeeper, 3 defenders, a central midfielder, and an attacking midfielder, to a team which has had issues with creativity and scoring goals. Is it a case that maybe they didn't do enough from an attacking perspective, or is it a case that by bringing in these other players, they're putting together a platform to elicit improvement from the attacking players that we already have?
I mean, for me, it's a mixture of both. If you'd asked Arsenal fans if we needed to buy a right centre-back to replace David Luiz, Saliba aside, that's a big one, I know. Yeah. The answer would have been yes. If you asked Arsenal fans if we needed a backup goalie or a right back, the answer would have been yes, and we've done that. Backup left back for Kieran Tierney, we've done that as well. So, whether people can grumble about the lack of attacking additions, I think defensively we had additions to make as well. And I think in terms of the profiles, in terms of, both in terms of their ages and their technical quality, I think we've recruited well on the whole. I'm happy with Ben White, even if maybe we've overpaid. The same with Ramsdale. We kind of have to wait and see what happens with him. But, everybody knows that the situation surrounding Leno is far from clear. So maybe there's even potential for him to break into the side this season. Tavares, completely fine with him. Low risk, low wage, kind of just there in case of emergency. So that's absolutely fine. And I'm happy with Tomiyasu as well, because I think right back was a huge problem. For me, I think Bellerin needed the loan. Chambers, even though he came into the side last season, he wasn't up to much. This time around, Cedric, just get him gone. I don't know, wherever he wants to go, just get him out. I have concerns about the attack, but for me, the concerns lie in the coaching and not the personnel, unfortunately. I really believe there's goals in this attack. Saka can do it. Smith Rowe can do it. Aubameyang and Lacazette, no matter what we think of them, there is at least 10 goals each in those 2 players. Ødegaard needs to contribute now as well. And I think as much as they need to improve on an individual basis, a lot of the issues for me lie in the lack of attacking freedom and verve they are afforded from the coach. So hopefully we can strike a balance with that, because I think on the whole, the squad is talented. And, it's not Chelsea levels and it's not City, United level, but it's not 8th. I mean, there's no way that this is an 8th place squad. So for me, it's about, we had to raise the floor of this squad, and we've done so. I'm very excited about Sambi as well coming in. So for me, we've gone about things the right way, targeting young players who can contribute in the short term, but also offer excitement for the long term. And sorry, Mikel, but future-proof the club. I think a lot of these signings were made, for him, but also what happens next, whether that's Arteta or not. So, which is a good thing. I don't think we've done that very well recently. So in terms of the overall business, I'm happy. And I think Arteta, there's no real hiding place for him now, because he's been backed and these are his players, these are his targets. And for me, there's a big question mark over him and being able to coach an attack. And I think that's where the real improvement has to lie for me personally, because I'm happy with the arrivals, and I know the departures were difficult, but the squad is in a good shape for me.
All right. Well, look, it is down to Mikel Arteta to get a tune out of this particular orchestra. We hope he does that, and we hope he does that as quickly as possible, obviously. But for now, we'll leave it there, Phil. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to Phil. You can find him on Twitter at Phil Costa, and you can find a link to his profile of Takehiro Tomiyasu in the show notes, or you can just head on over to Arseblog.com. You'll find it there in the columnist section. Now on the Arsecast, to delve into what happened in the transfer window, to talk about who did what, why they did it, and lots more. I'm delighted to welcome back to the show. It's David Ornstein from The Athletic. Hi, David. It's been a while.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks. It's long overdue, isn't it? We've been trying to get together for a while, and it's great to be back on with you.
Yeah, you seem to be a busy man, so I'll let you off this time. It has been a crazy summer from an Arsenal perspective. There's been a lot going on, and before we delve into the nuts and bolts of all of that, I suppose what I want to ask first is, over the course of the summer, it became quite clear that there was a very defined strategy when it comes to recruitment and the kinds of players that Arsenal were going to bring in terms of the age profile. So we've got two 21-year-olds in, two 22-year-olds and two 23-year-old players in, the 6 players that Arsenal have brought in this summer. Even some of the other names that we were linked with were players of around that age. Nobody was really over 24 years of age. So that seems to have been a very definite plan. How far back was that strategic decision made? And, can you give us some insight into how that would have been brought about? Like, who are the people involved that sat down and said, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And what way are we going to implement this?
Well, Andrew, I think it goes back quite a way. And before people might think, I don't think this was a strategy that was established on the eve of the transfer window or the months coming into it. I think it has been the plan since Edu took sole control following the departure of Raul Sanllehi. Perhaps it was a thought that they had even prior to that. I'm not too sure. Certainly prior to that, the actions spoke louder than words if youth was the strategy, because in came Pablo Mari, Cedric Suarez. Prior to that, David Luiz. The Willian signing is one which I was opposed to at the time, in terms of I didn't think it was going to work out for any party. I don't want a footballer to have a bad move. I don't want a club to take on a player who's not right for them. And I think we could all see it a mile off. And I'll give credit to Arsenal fans. Many got behind that signing once it actually happened and realised that his stats were good in his final season at Chelsea, and welcome him into your club like you should when a new signing comes in, an attacking player who's had a really good career on the whole. But the previous concerns were very quick in coming to fruition. And I think that was an anomaly. We don't need to pick over the bones of that right now, unless you want to later. But it was not in keeping with the way that Edu was looking to take stuff from the moment he was in sole command. he was very clearly, and it was explained by lots of people at the club, looking to build this young team, young squad for the future, blending it with experienced players. And yes, I am confused by the fact that summer of 2020 and previous seemed about experience to help the young homegrown talent come through. And summer of 2021 seems, no, we're going all young, forget about the old experienced players. And that raises concerns that we can explore in terms of the strategy and the structure and the coordination and contrasting visions, etc. But straight to your question, yes, it was the idea of Edu to build a young squad of this age profile, to blend them with world-class experienced players, to bring Arsenal, in his mind, back to the top of competition, domestic and European, in a number of years. And I know that was something which, when explained to Mikel Arteta, was completely understandably a bit of a shock, or maybe shock's the wrong word, but anyone in his position when he became Arsenal head coach and then manager understands that you can't wait for tomorrow. And as noble as it is to plan for the future, you also need to get results now. And I think Edu was trying to impress on Mikel for a long time that this can happen. We can weather the storm. We're going to have some tough times. We're prepared for it to get worse before it gets better. And I reported at the time, this is in the year 2020, I think, that they're looking at this plan coming to fruition in 2 to 3 years' time. You can go back and check some of my comments. I said sort of 22, 23, and they're going to have to ride a rough period in the meantime to get to where they want to go. But it was very clearly articulated to me then that Edu had the backing of the hierarchy in rolling out this vision, in implementing it, and that they would stay strong in the hard times. Now we're in the hardest of times. And so that, I'm sure, will lead us further into the conversation. But it's not a knee-jerk to my knowledge. It's a very clear strategy. And please, anybody listening to this, I'm not defending it. I'm not taking sides. I am just telling you what their thinking was. Sure. And it will be up to them whether it works or not. Yeah,
sure. I mean, look, we're trying to deal in facts, and this is what it is. It's not necessarily endorsement of it or anything like that. I'm quite curious as to your phrase there when you talk about Edu and how he is in sole command. And as the technical director, I think that's what people would expect from somebody in that role at a football club, that he basically dictates is the wrong word, but decides, I guess, what the strategy for the club is in terms of recruitment and maybe even in terms of how a team plays. That feels like something that's a bit further down the line for Arsenal. So, I mean, how involved in this is Mikel Arteta? Because I think one of the things that would maybe not confuse people, but I think there is a perception that Mikel Arteta, because of the promotion that he got to manager rather than just being head coach, and because of everything that he has said and everything he's done since he's come in, and how open he has been about what he feels needs to be done at the football club, that there is a measure of authority there that is perhaps equal to Edu or even above Edu in some ways. That, you know, there's this idea that Edu was very much involved in the previous setup with Raul Sanllehi and everything else, and that he is now perhaps working more with Mikel Arteta than above Mikel Arteta. So can you give us a little bit on how that dynamic is working at the club right now? Because I think James made the point on the Arsecast Extra the other day, and it was a good one, that any manager is going to want players who are ready, who are experienced, who have the requisite quality to make your team more competitive. And building a team is much more difficult and much more troublesome. And, you know, when you're the guy in the firing line, you can understand why you might want a bit more ready-made experience. So I'm just curious as to how that dynamic has worked and you know, what sort of input Mikel Arteta would have had into this strategic decision.
Well, I think, again, we need to take it back to provide the context. Raul Sanllehi had become all-powerful following the departure of Ivan Gazidis and Sven Mislintat. He had created a power base from which it appeared he wouldn't be shifted. Obviously, that changed. He brought Edu in. We remember that process, which involved move for Monchi and consideration of other candidates, and Edu eventually got the role. But he was very much sort of working for, you could say, Raul Sanllehi, who was head of football. With Raul Sanllehi gone, Edu steps forward and is very clear. Like, a lot of us have seen Edu over the years and heard him speak, and fans have seen the interviews. And yeah, I think he'd probably like to do more. He comes from a country where the technical director fronts up in the press conferences and often announces the team selection and answers all questions and appears in the media. And you know, that is largely what happens on the continent as well. If you look at Monchi at Sevilla, Thiago Pinto at Roma just this week, holding a press conference to analyse the transfer window. And Edu's the sort of character that I think would like to do that. Maybe it's not such a done thing in England or at Arsenal. But he stepped forward and it was very clear to all of us that this was going to be his project. And Arteta at the time was head coach. And he is responsible for, if not hiring and firing managers, at least recommending that to the board, and working with the head coach manager to take the positional requirements and find players to offer to the manager, and various options in each of those positions. You know, we all know how that model is meant to work.
Yeah.
Mikel Arteta's promotion to manager was something that I think Arteta himself was in favour of. Clearly, there's been huge conversation about this, and a lot of people around, outside Arsenal, close to the club, feel this was a big mistake, and that even if it was going to happen, you still needed a really respected, powerful operator, whether it be Sanllehi or somebody else, who can provide the shield for both the technical director and the head coach manager, who can be the figurehead of that operation, who can front up to the executives, who can front up to the media, who can work the corridors of power, who can deal with everything, football and non-football, that allows the head coach manager to just focus on their role. So Arteta enthusiastically taking on this role of greater prominence, you know, we can't have sympathy for that, because he's laying his own bed there, and it does come with additional responsibilities, which I hope for his sake he revels in his career, Arsenal and potentially beyond. But at the moment, it seems like he's swimming against the tide a bit, because he's having to, by the nature of the title manager, probably get involved in stuff that I don't think Arsenal's coach manager at the moment should be. Arsenal just need to be focused on, Arsenal's leader needs to be focused on just training up this team urgently. And of course, you're going to have conversations around recruitment and things like that, because he's desperate to build a team that, in his mind, can fulfill his requirements, can implement his vision and start playing the football that he, of course, wants to play. You know, speaking to people at the club, there's been this narrative outside that it's gone back to the Arsene Wenger era. I don't get that sense. I get the sense that with Arsene, everything was in his hands. Everything had to be approved by him before it took place, even the buying of teacups in the canteen. You know, I'm exaggerating, people listening. But he was genuinely all-powerful. Whereas I don't think Mikel is to the same extent, or you really can be in football these days. So he is more of a manager, but he is not the Ferguson-Wenger level of power. But I'm digressing a bit from your actual question. They are kind of like the dual heads.
Yeah.
Because of this contentious rise to manager. But within the club structure, as much as Mikel's word is carries huge weight, and they are building around him. They do still have strong faith in him, and it's going to take things getting dramatically worse, I'm sure, for that to change. Edu is, to my knowledge, the traditional technical director. Well, when I say traditional, I don't mean historic, but in modern football.
Sure.
He is the man who is in charge of the transfers and heavily influential in contract renewals, in the decision-making process and the execution of them. Of course, Richard Garlick's on board now, and we'll speak about him too. Some people say, I'm not sure if Edu's power base is weakening and if he could be the next one out. I see the same rumours as you, Andrew. But I don't have any evidence to suggest that actually internally, Kroenkes, Tim Lewis, Vinay, Richard Garlick, and various others here or there are not continuing with this pathway, irrespective of the largely understandable noise outside.
Sure. I mean, just going back to something you said about maybe there being a piece missing in terms of the structure, the executive structure of the club, like that guy who would be there to take the heat off the head coach, manager, the technical director, etc., that sort of figurehead, if you want to call him a sporting director rather than the technical director, somebody who maybe exists, above that. If people are talking about that and aware of that, is there any sense that there might be a plan to put somebody like that in place, or are they content with the setup that they've got right now, where we have a manager and a technical director who, as you say, appear to be very closely intertwined, where the failure of one is probably going to have some consequences for the other?
Yeah, it's a really good question that I don't have a precise answer to. So I'm not going to lie to our audiences and say, yeah, I hear somebody's coming in, or absolutely not. So it's a bit of a fence-sitting one in which you say, I don't know. But again, explaining the wider picture here, when Raul Sanllehi left and Huss Fahmy left, it was just about it had to be the end of all of this change. And then they needed to find someone. So Richard Garlick came in for Huss. It had to be the end. Everybody at and around the club acknowledged that there had been far too much change in far too short a period, considering historically at Arsenal, there had been barely any change for a couple of decades. And it was destabilising off the pitch, and I believe, as a personal opinion, that has filtered down onto the pitch as well. Others may have different views, but it can't be helpful. It's not conducive to success. And I don't think Edu wanted any more change once the Sanllehi one had been done. Garlick was on the way in, Huss Fahmy was out, and I think he was of the view, and it was relayed to the board, no more change, please. Now leave this as the structure. He's got great self-belief, Edu. He's a very charismatic figure. He's a very nice man, as any of you who have met him will know. And he believes he can take on that mantle. When I've said loads, and I'm not the only one, he's never worked within the English game. Obviously, in this type of role, he was a player at Arsenal and a legendary one at that. He'd only been technical director at Corinthians and the Brazil FA. Hadn't built a scouting network, recruitment network, had to build contacts. And, I'm sure everyone in that role sort of knows agents and the odd executive and ex-player here and there. But this isn't just any old club or job. It's Arsenal Football Club trying to compete at the absolute elite level. But he backed himself on that front, and he backed himself working alongside Mikel to implement that. However, people with more experience and more clout within the game can't believe that they don't have that extra person that you're talking about. And look, I don't know if Sanllehi was right or wrong. 1 minute he was being hailed by all the fans, the next minute it was the complete opposite. Many within football rate him extremely highly. Some others don't. He had more of a commercial background than a football background. But there are really big hitters out there. And I think it's a bit disrespectful for me to start naming them, because people will take that to mean, oh, could he be coming into Arsenal?
Sure, yeah,
You've seen the names that are in the media and around. And I don't know what agendas are at play to try and get people into positions or not. But it's a really tricky balancing act. They've all said they don't want more change, and we've said no more change is important. But at the same time, I do think the structure is a little bit weak and struggling in a way that it is not at Manchester City. It is not at Chelsea. It is not at Manchester United.
Yeah.
It is not at Liverpool. That could be subject to change at Liverpool, but even if it does change, as I reported in my Monday column at May with Michael Edwards, they will have a succession plan in place. And you can extrapolate that over to the continent and lower down the Premier League as well. I don't think Arsenal have quite enough of the footballing expertise that they should. And I don't want that to be implied as a criticism, because they will say we do, and more bringing somebody else in could wreck the chemistry that they're trying to build slowly and organically. But again, personal opinion and preference. I think the level of it's all well and good intending that it's just Edu, Richard Garlick as his sidekick, Mikel, but that's a raw and inexperienced dual heads,
sure,
with an experienced guy next to them and a very highly rated guy in Richard Garlick, but he hasn't worked at an Arsenal level club just yet until now. And I do think in comparison to the other clubs, there is something lacking structurally. I mean, not every owner is a football expert, so I don't think that's a stick to beat the Cronkies with. You can beat them with whatever stick you want, but they're not unique in that. But as you come down, when you see sort of Vinay, so not sort of area of expertise around football specifically, of his many strengths, Tim Lewis, a lawyer and an Arsenal fan. One of the pieces we wrote on The Athletic said there was some favour amongst sections of the hierarchy for bringing back somebody like a David O'Leary, who is in and around the Arsenal boardroom and director's box. You see people like Pat Rice there, certain matches, and others who maybe can help this operation, this rebuilding job, this project, sorry, I hate using it, I was trying to think of something else, from a sporting and footballing perspective. But it's also not easy. It's not like suddenly Arsenal would become masters of the transfer market because they bring David O'Leary or Pat Rice or Ralph Rangnick or Michael Emenalo or Mark Overmars. You know, it might still go wrong. And that's why these things are really difficult. I do feel that the structural issues have got Arsenal into a bit of a mess on and off the pitch, and something feels like it needs to be done. I don't know exactly what. Yeah,
do you think maybe there's an issue of perception? Because you talk about Edu, and while we're on him, we might as well broach this particular thing, you know, and he does seem like a nice man, but I also feel like, you know, looking at it externally and looking at it as a fan and as somebody who wants the club to succeed and to do well, I'm right behind this strategy of bringing in young players, because Arsenal have done the old player thing. It hasn't worked, so do something different. I think there's some logic to it. There is a need for a rebuild. But talking about clout and talking about how you're perceived in the football world, has there been any discussion of, and I know this might sound trivial, but like during periods of this preseason and periods of this transfer window when Arsenal fans have been looking for the club to present itself in the right way possible, we see pictures of the technical director on holidays with Raul Sanllehi, with Kia Joorabchian, individuals about whom people have had some concerns because of perceived influence on aspects of the transfer business, etc., etc. Edu having a holiday, which of course he is entitled to have a holiday, but the perception of the work that you do can be influenced by the public image that you present of yourself as well. Mm. So has that been in any way discussed or an area of concern for other people at the club? Or are we as fans perhaps not seeing all the other stuff that goes on in the background, which makes Edu perfectly entitled to take a holiday, and if he wants to take a picture, so what? You know, maybe that's the way that he looks at it or the club look at it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area that a lot of us think and muse over, and I'm sure I know the same happens inside the club. It's a big club, and a lot of people see the same things as us, and think, like, what's he doing? I think the optics are particularly poor, especially the images with Kia Joorabchian and Raul Sanllehi. As much as you're entitled to do what you want and do and be with who you want, but what's gone before over the last few years, and the clear departure that Arsenal took from Raul Sanllehi, which has never been explained publicly, if there was anything to explain publicly, I don't think it would have been made for comfortable viewing, for given all of the scrutiny around those people, for the current technical director, who's meant to be leading the club forward, to be with them. I don't know of the hierarchy being disgruntled. I just think it didn't send out a good image, especially during a transfer window. And I'm not sure they would go around doing that again. Maybe you do it at the time, not kind of realizing the impact. And it goes back to Edu being a sort of happy-go-lucky guy that doesn't really care about the public perception. He's on social media. We've seen some stories that his daughter has had to shut off her direct messages or something because of the abuse that was raining in for her father. No one condones any of that. Just condemn it. But yeah, I mean, Edu and anyone, like other technical directors, will have taken time off. Like Cheeky Bagirstein was away in Spain at one point during the summer. But they all get on with their work. You know, you can take your laptop and your phone and you can spend 23 hours of the day working, and you get pictured cooking a barbecue or being on a boat or being at a restaurant, and then everyone comes down on you like a ton of bricks. But those others don't tend to post images on social media. And so given the context of where Arsenal are, and it is a bit of a mess at the moment, on the pitch at least, that's just going to trigger people and antagonize them who already have questions over somebody like Edu. And yeah, there are people inside the club that you know they probably don't know exactly what he does, because a lot of it takes place behind the scenes with a small entrusted circle of people who, from what I know, all speak incredibly highly of Edu and his work ethic, his the ideas that they hope will come to fruition on the long run. And these aren't people that would just sit around and accept a blagger or somebody who's not doing things the right way. I think that would come out. But yes, and I'm not endorsing or defending. There are people, I do think there are people wondering, you know, exactly what the role is. And especially when there are people at the club who see Mikel Arteta, whether you like him or not, working so hard every single day, every living, breathing second to try and arrest this rot and to try and turn it around. It's not working at the minute, but I don't think anyone questions his efforts and the energy that he's applying. And you only ever see him in training kit or on the side of the pitch, whereas that's slightly different with Edu. And it seems that people have jumped on that a couple of times, especially with the barbecue. And above all of that, I think, given what's gone before with Arsenal and, you know, the Cronkies, from what we hear, paying closer attention to what's going on after all the speculation around agents and this and that and the other, and having Josh Kroenke has now been over, we saw, which is, I think, the first time since the outbreak of the pandemic. And maybe it was one time at the end of last season and then once more recently, and installing Tim Lewis there as well in recent times. You would imagine that they've got a sharp eye for anything that they're not happy with at the moment. And so, yeah, I do think that's more perception. I don't think you can read into pictures of people having a holiday and say he's a good or bad technical director. But yes, I don't think pictures like that are helpful, especially with such a sensitive fan base. Yeah.
I'm going to come to incoming business in a moment, but I think one of the aspects, I suppose, that you would judge the work of a technical director on is the sales that you make. And Arsenal have had a lot of players up for grabs, if you like, this summer. Only one of them has been sold, Joe Willock to Newcastle, and it's a decent deal. I think Lewis Ambrose on one of our Patreon podcasts basically said, though, Joe Willock sold Joe Willock to Newcastle based on what he did there at the end of last season with his incredible goal-scoring record. They really wanted him. And I guess that does explain some of it. When a player is valuable, when a player, the perception of a player is that he is useful and that he can do something for you, it's a lot easier to sell that player, you know, because it's coming off the back of performances or what have you. Nevertheless, there's homegrown talent at the club that was up for sale and didn't go out. A lot of loan deals, even taking into account the current state of the football market. We all know finances are very, very impacted by the pandemic and the lack of fans, etc., etc. Were there targets for Edu when it came to the outgoing business? Because, you know, whether you're a fan of the Cronkies or not, the money has been there for the incoming players. 140, 150 million pounds, the biggest window in Arsenal's history. So the financial backing was there for the players that they wanted to bring in. However, it does feel like that kind of outlay requires some measure of income to offset it. So are you aware that there was a target perhaps for generating revenue from player sales? And if so, have we fallen well below that? Or is there an acceptance that because of this market, we could sell some players next summer, clubs will have more money, some of the loans with options and obligations could be taken up, so that will go some way to doing that?
Well, your last point was the vision a year ago, and it hasn't come to fruition of you know, jam tomorrow. I don't know if there was a specific target. If there was, I'm not aware of it. But yes, the word coming out of the club and people close to them coming into this window was that they can generate really big money for these outgoings. There was even suggestions of around £100 million. These were forecasts from people who work in the industry, work at Arsenal, speak to people at Arsenal. So you're looking at maybe a Lacazette, maybe a Bellerin, a Torreira, a Guendouzi, a Joe Willock. There's probably a couple of names that have escaped
Maitland-Niles,
me.
maybe.
Maitland-Niles, you know, Reece Nelson.
Eddie Nketiah. You
add them up, you know, a 10 here, an 8 there, a 15 here, 20 there, and you can get into some serious revenues. That was the plan of Arsenal also in the summer of 2020, and that's why there was some investment towards the start of the market. Am I right in thinking 2020?
Probably towards the end, wasn't it? Because there was Gabriel and then Thomas Partey.
Was there someone before Gabriel? There was Willian, Gabriel. I think there was somebody else.
Trying to think. I'll have a look.
You lose track of all the different positions, but yeah. Anyway, they were going for a lot of players. Some of them came in. They were steeling themselves and readying themselves for a party or Aouar. And so the question was, well, how are you going to balance this in a pandemic? And everybody was saying, wait till the end of the window before, you know, judging how this is going to be financed. And Arsenal were not alone in failing. Even the heralded Chelsea failed to get players out, at least to the level that they wanted to. And so that was going to make this summer all the more important for that. Actually, Arsenal probably bridged the gap to an extent by doing so much outgoing work in January, not for money, but just to at least clear the decks and relieve them of some of the salaries that they were paying. And so this one was the real this was meant to be the real deal window for outgoings. And Chelsea came back to the fore in that sense. And even Man United got a good sale in Dan James, and they are very poor sellers traditionally. So they don't need to be amazing sellers with their wealth. Manchester City also traditionally, in recent years, not spectacular sellers. They did all right this window, actually. Arsenal, no, they fell short of expectations in the sales department. And I think you can look at a bit of the inexperience in their setup, because some of these guys who work in the industry just know how to work the market. They know how to strike deals and convince clubs of their players' worth, even if it means playing them a couple of times before deadline day. I'm not sure that was the case with Dan James. It may just be a happy coincidence that he started 2 of United's first 3 games and then got a lucrative move. I think it's disappointing when you look at the money that has not come in for some players Arsenal paid big money for or should have value. Hector Bellerin, 26 years old. Yeah, he had the ACL, but Arsenal surely could have garnered some money for him. Torreira was a big investment and it's just flitted away. Guendouzi, whatever you think of him and his behaviour, he's a very highly rated young player who I think is now in the French full squad again. Correct me if I'm wrong. You should be getting significant money for him. There is another side to this story. And again, please don't think I'm defending, because I'm just saying it as it is and the truth. Because I was the one who reported the Roma interest in Lacazette and the suggestions that they were willing to go to about 30 million euros last summer. You will speak to some people at the club and they will explain to you, well, if you were on the end of that phone call and they're not offering the actual money, they're suggesting what they'd be willing to pay, or we don't receive it in writing, or they say they will one day and then the next day they say to you, actually, can we do it as a loan with an option to buy? And similar in this case with Everton and Ainsley Maitland-Niles, everyone was getting excited and we're not the ones who see the offer, Yeah. He's an England international who Arsenal either would have wanted to recoup a really strong loan fee or a really high obligation to buy if they're going to be who we want them all to be, which is really good sellers, or sell on a permanent basis to Everton for big money now. He's 24 years old and has hopefully a really good future ahead of him, whether that's at Arsenal or elsewhere. There is more to this skill than we all understand. And so unless you are on the other end of that phone or email, you don't know what the offer is. But I maintain that Arsenal haven't done well enough in getting rid of players, and that is something that they definitely need to improve on going forward, because I think they do have a good squad. I think they have a squad of players that could sell, or could either excel for them or sell for decent money, and it's not happening in either of those things at the moment.
I mean, is the Granit Xhaka situation a perfect example of that kind of thing where, look, he had a very good Euros. He's 28 years of age. He's got some good years ahead of him. He's got, some issues at Arsenal, but, he's a reliable player, at least in terms of his availability, very rarely injured, durable guy, was keen on a move to Roma. Roma were obviously keen on a move. It looked like Arsenal were willing to facilitate that. And then all of a sudden it falls apart and Arsenal extend his contract. It does suggest some muddled thinking in terms of how you approach selling players. Like, if you're willing to let him go, why are you extending his contract a week later? And I know Arteta said that, we never wanted him to leave, but, that's a different side to it entirely.
It's a really hard one, the Xhaka situation, because when you hear of that Roma interest, everyone thought that, well, that's going to happen now. And rightly so. He's, had a tumultuous career with Arsenal. Everyone accepts he seems a decent person and a good player. And maybe it's time to go. And it judging by some of his comments, it seemed that he was up for it and that Roma would come in strong and it would get done. Small bit of sympathy for Arsenal. The point we just made, if the offer is inadequate for a player who everyone's been raving about for the Euros, they would have been battered for just giving him away. It seems that the offer wasn't good enough from Roma. So that's the sympathetic side. The potentially critical side is suddenly he doesn't just get a contract extension, but he's wearing the captain's armband. And it's extremely confusing for fans and media and all of us onlookers, and it's not been a great start to the season for him, like it hasn't been for the team. I mean, some of it may be in protection of value, and it may come to be seen as quite clever if he has a good season and a 20 million offer comes in for him next summer because he had that small extension. then everyone will say, well done, that was actually quite canny. It's hard to understand that in the moment, and it might not happen. So we may come down on them like a ton of bricks with justification. But they find themselves in a position where they don't have a decent offer, and his value is going to go to nothing unless they trigger the extension. So maybe they're hedging their bets that he can have a good season and they can extract some value for him. I don't think the contract extension was like we're rewarding you, you're one of our leading players, and it's not like a Bukayo Saka or an Emile Smith-Rowe where you're trying to tie down their future and they deserve to get loads more money. I think that was a business decision. I don't know for sure, but I think it was a business decision. Yeah. But I do agree with you. The perception of the Xhaka saga this summer is yet another blow to Arsenal's operation. And I've got to underline, when I'm trying to explain all of this stuff with both sides of the story, the results are there for all of us to see at the moment. It's disastrous right now. And many, many fans listening to this who have very little hope are justified in feeling that way because our eyes don't lie. Yeah. But this is trying to explain a bit more than just what's on the surface.
Sure. I mean, I think the fact that the club didn't do an official announcement of the Xhaka contract extension tells you that it's not something that was, look at this is great, you're all going to feel better after this happens. So, the way it came out, I think, speaks to that. But look, let's talk about the incoming business, because if there is hope, if there is some optimism out there, it is the fact that Arsenal have brought in 6 players during the transfer window. The money that has been spent has reshaped the squad. In terms of the way this went down and in terms of the player identification side of things, you spoke about Edu maybe bringing some targets to Mikel Arteta and Arteta sort of taking his pick of those. I mean, my understanding is that at least a couple of those players were very, very much guys that Mikel Arteta himself specifically wanted, going back to what you said earlier, within the framework that the club have set out for recruitment. So we're going to get you players of this age or thereabouts. These are the ones that we think are available, or the ones that we should look at. And Arteta has then decided, okay, well, this guy. Is that sort of how it's gone down in many of those cases? Because, we're looking at Ben White, we're looking at Sambi Lokonga, we're looking at, I've forgotten who, Martin Odegaard, of course, who is I think a fantastic signing and a player that, is easy to get behind in terms of what he can bring to the team. So, is that the way it sort of played out, that Arteta has said, okay, well, these are the central defenders you're suggesting, I want this guy, and this is the guy I want. These are the goalkeepers, this is the guy that I want.
Yeah, so I don't know specifically and in really fine detail whose voice carries most weight. What I do know is that Arteta's voice carries far more weight in this since that point we talked about earlier of rising from head coach to manager than Unai Emery's did in the recruitment process. Unai Emery was very vocal in his wishes. I think he spoke to Harry Maguire before he decided it was actually just going to be between Man City and Man United. Spoke to Wilfried Zaha, which is stuff we've seen publicly, and was quite clear in his thinking, but very little of it was acted upon by the hierarchy. I think they tried in certain instances, but ultimately, in the case of Nicola Pepe, that was their decision, not his. Whereas Mikel Arteta is much more powerful in that dynamic. And so he wanted Martin Odegaard back. That was his decision. He was in the building. He had really impressed everybody at Arsenal as a player and as a character, and he seemed really happy there. So he was their first choice target, and this has been quite well reported. If they finally got a clear indication from Real Madrid that he wasn't coming, then they would turn to alternative targets, candidates. We know somebody like James Maddison was highly thought of. There would have been a lot of players that were highly thought of. I don't know personally, and I'm not doubting anybody else's reports, but I don't know of any sort of active pursuit for Maddison. It was, as far as I know, again, full respect to everybody else, Martin Odegaard. And it was clearly explained to me that they will go until that clear signal comes from Real Madrid based on Mikel wanting him. I'm sure he likes other players a lot as well. They would have had to put a different plan in place if it wasn't possible. Other players, Ben White seemed to be, I don't know specifically, but Mikel Arteta would have seen loads of him within English football, and wouldn't surprise me if he was the driver of that as well. I don't know specifically about Tavares. Feels, and this is speculation, so please take it as that it's more of an Edu type, and Edu's people, the analytics and the pod of people that they've got there, who would have targeted a really high potential, decent value left back cover. Edu wanted a player of 20 to 22, was it, that I reported ages ago, for left back cover, to challenge Tierney, to back him up, to maybe succeed him in the future. And that seems to be what they've got. He's Portuguese, so perhaps that's more an Edu type target. Lukonga, again, more speculative, but there's the Vincent Kompany link and Anderlecht, and Mikel Arteta is very close to Kompany, so feels like Arteta would have been pivotal in that. And he would have been on the phone to these boys, He would have been on the phone to some of those guys, and to Aaron Ramsdale and to Odegaard and to Ben White, and convincing them, talking to them about how he wants their strategy, how he wants them to fit into their strategy. I don't know how much of that Unai Emery did ahead of signings, but I know Mikel Arteta's been doing that, and it shows he's core to what they're trying to do. And Tomiyasu was one that Edu had been considering for a long time. Tottenham were in the mix, some other clubs as well. I know there were some that Mikel Arteta wasn't so keen on. There were talks about a swap with Emerson Royal, or swap plus money, Emerson Royal and Hector Bellerin. Don't think he was so keen. Maybe if Dest had been available as part of the swap, that would have been more attractive. And I think Barcelona would have been open with their financial problems, but Dest didn't want to leave Barcelona only a year in. Mikel Arteta knows Barcelona really well. So Tomiyasu seems to be one that feels like a mutual collaboration. I didn't hear of anyone specifically championing him more than the other. So I've given you a pretty vague answer because I don't want to pretend that I know who was pushing some more than others. But whether these are good signings, whether they are going to be good signings, whether they are good value for money or terrible value for money, I don't sense massive ructions behind the scenes over who they were going for. Whereas that Unai Emery wanted to sign Wilfried Zaha and they went for Nicola Pepe.
Yeah.
He didn't say no, I don't want Pepe, but he had a clear target as yet, and it may come out in coming weeks and months when we have conversations and make calls. You'll hear Mikel really wanted him and they gave him. But at this point in time, I'm actually hearing that things are pretty collaborative and everyone's on the same page.
All right, well, look, finally, I suppose we have to talk a little bit about Mikel Arteta himself. And the start to the season, as you said, has been horrendous. It's really difficult. Pre-season wasn't great either. There's a lot of concern. Obviously, when your team is sitting bottom of the table, you're looking at it and thinking, this is not great. There is a balance, isn't there, between giving a manager money, which speaks to a level of faith in him. Like if you're giving a manager, you're backing a manager to the tune of £150 million with new signings, particularly when not much money has come in and they still brought in the right back on deadline day. It suggests that those in charge have faith in Mikel Arteta to make the kind of team that Arsenal fans want to see from these players. At the same time, though, when a manager is given £150 million, however you rationalise it in terms of it takes time to build a team and we can all accept that, there's also a short-term need to deliver results on the pitch. So with that in mind, I mean, how much pressure is there on Arteta internally as opposed to externally? Because externally, and I know we all exist in our social media echo chambers and everything else, and things feel a lot more intense online because that's the way it goes. But there must be some pressure internally as well. Mikel Arteta will know as well as anybody that he has to start winning games for Arsenal. You know, I think they're going to give him more time inside than some people might outside. But how does that balance get struck?
Yeah, it's difficult because when you say he's been backed handsomely in the market, and on the one hand you think, well, owners deserve credit for that, and I think they do, but it's all relative because two things. You can point back to, well, where was the backing earlier? And you shouldn't need to have a window of these proportions because you should be gradually investing, and maybe a cherry on the cake like a Lukaku each year.
Sure.
Saul Niguez on loan or Jack Grealish type thing. You know, this it struck of trying to buy your way out of trouble. And you should also look at it and say, well, are the owners applying a football vision to it? It's not just the number; it's the quality, and
sure.
It's an act of faith, no doubt at all. It's like an amazing opportunity for Edu and Mikel Arteta specifically that the owners have put upon them. But if that doesn't work, you know, as owners, when you're looking at owners, you need to be fair and say, well, did they apply as owners the right level of footballing scrutiny and you know, responsibility with their opening of purse strings? I know 1 minute we're begging for money to be spent and the next minute we're saying, yeah, but be careful about how you spend that. But they're at the top of the club, and that's a fair amount of scrutiny. But no doubt with that, yeah, you then can't sit bottom of the league. It's absolutely inconceivable in everybody's minds that Arsenal will stay there for long. And I think the complete expectation is that he will get some results together. He needs to urgently, and then they will start to very, very slowly take baby steps towards a recovery that, let's face it, Arsenal seem to be in a perpetual cycle of this. You know, last turn of the year, 2020 into 2021, Arteta was under the cosh, and then he turned it around with wins against Chelsea and West Brom and steadied the ship, and then it sort of fell apart a bit at the end. And there was some mess inherited. I'll take that point, which is legitimately raised by people who know what Arteta was dealing with. There were a lot of players that wanted to leave when he came into the club. The atmosphere wasn't good post-Emery. You know, it was well documented that he had lost the dressing room, for that want of a better phrase. There were communication issues and a lot more. But at the same time, you can't talk about inheriting mess forever, because Unai Emery could argue that after Arsene Wenger, and everybody who comes into a club, David Moyes at Man United, Van Gaal, Mourinho, everyone that comes into Chelsea. But, you know, that's the nature of the beast, and you've got to deal with it. He's had much longer now than Unai Emery had, and you can't keep talking about the past and the mess and the pandemic and the COVID cases and the injuries. Well, many of those factors are dealt with by every club, and those with the most ambition would have sacked him by now, in the case of Chelsea, which keeps being referenced publicly by a lot of people. But I go back to that point that Arteta was aware of that need to win now when Edu was laying out his vision. Don't worry, you are our man, and we're going to build in the next 2 to 3 years with multiple transfer windows to get rid of those players that we need to get rid of out of contract, bring new ones in, blend youth with experience, and try and get back Arsenal back to where they belong in the long run. And he was rightly concerned that you need to win now. He's been around English football and football his whole life, so he knows that need to win now. So getting down to the crux of your point, like, of course, he's under searing pressure now. But when I say that, I don't mean he's about to be sacked. They're the bottom of the league. This is a disastrous start to the season. It could not have been worse, apart from the League Cup win. But, you know, I was listening to the Arsenal Beat podcast, and James Ollie was underlining the mitigations, the reasons. And, like, this isn't defence. It's just fact. The COVID layoffs have been brutal. The injuries have been brutal. You could ask, could anything be done internally but that's a perpetual question if you're an Arsenal supporter or follower or even just outside observer. And they've backed him with players who he hasn't had at his disposal yet. So in my mind, there is no scenario in which he is sacked before having the chance to properly work with the players that he has brought in and he has been backed with. Even though the current position is unacceptable, I think it's also unacceptable to not let him work with the team. And if we were to name the team now, it would be very different to the team for the first 3 league games. And so that will be the judgment. Yeah, they need to scramble out of this mess. Norwich, West Brom, Tottenham, Brighton. They need to pick up some points quickly. But he needs to be given a run of fixtures. And that's why for quite some months now, and we're going back towards the end of last season, there were some well-informed journalists who were saying he has until Christmas, because it was a bad end to the season in terms of the European exit. Obviously, some momentum was built in the league. And that gave green shoots of hope. But there were a lot of people around, well-connected people in football, saying he's got until the turn of the year, 2021 into 2022, to show Arsenal are competitive again. There was a piece by Matt Law in The Telegraph saying he's got 5 games, otherwise he could be under really sharp scrutiny. Like, I don't hear people inside the club massively complaining about him. In fact, there's a real strong will for him to succeed. And these are not people that are trying to spin something to put out a positive message. This is not communications department. There is clear confusion or footballing dissatisfaction. You can see that in a lot of players on the pitch. They don't all seem to know exactly what's being asked of them, or they can't deliver what's being asked of them, or a bit of both. And so, you hear bits and bobs on the training ground that give you little causes for concern. But then when you're not the person there, I think it's really hard to judge. And that's why much of our journalistic work happens after somebody's left the club.
People are willing to talk.
People are willing to talk and explain it properly.
Yeah. Until
that moment, there is genuinely 2 sides to every story. You speak to a player that's not happy with how things are going under manager X, but that's because either it could be genuine or it could be because they're not playing. And then you speak to another player who actually really likes it. These are not binary black and white things. And I don't sense from internally, in response to your question, that the carpet is being dragged from beneath Mikel Arteta's feet. I don't sense the tectonic plates are starting to shift. But we all know that if this trajectory continues, you get to a point where something has to change. And so I think, sort of part guess, part educated view, they're going to give him quite a lot longer and show total faith in him. I can't say that definitively because there were similar sort of sentiments coming out shortly before Unai Emery was sacked, and we wrote about it and we talked about it. But for the time being, despite him being in a worse position than Emery, and that's when people normally come out the woodwork and you start getting those rumblings. Yeah, it's about to go bang. I'm not sensing that now, and I think that is, for fear of saying it, understandable until he's got that team at his disposal, and that will be the acid test.
Well, look, I mean, the very simple solution for Mikel Arteta is to start winning some football games. Everything is terrible when you're losing, and I'm not saying everything is great when you're winning, but it certainly does take the heat off a bit. So, from an Arsenal fan's perspective, I really hope he can start doing that and he can put a run of games together. But look, we better leave it there. David, thank you very much for your insight into everything that's been going on. It's great to talk to you again, and hopefully we catch up again soon.
It's a pleasure. Sorry to anyone for the waffle and fence sitting, but these things aren't always easy. However, it is a pleasure to come on with you, Andrew, always. And I wish everybody listening all the best.
Thanks, David. As always, great to talk to David. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. I should just point out that there was an extra bit as well in which we talked about the performances of the team in the first 3 games, which for some reason did not get recorded. I can paraphrase basically by saying, not good enough, and there's plenty of room and need for improvement. But look, great to talk to David. You can find him on Twitter. He is at David_Ornstein, at David_Ornstein. And of course, you can find his writing and reporting in The Athletic. I'm going to leave it there for now because it's been a long show. We do have a football-free weekend unless you're invested in internationals. And I have to say, I'm not. I can't do it. I've got enough on my football plate with Arsenal without having to add to it with Ireland, robbed in midweek by referees and Cristiano Ronaldo. So like, I just can't. So whatever you're doing, have yourselves a great weekend. Thank you for being here as always. If you want to give us a rating or a review via whatever podcast app you use, that would be very much appreciated. So thank you for that in advance. We will have an Arsecast Extra for you on Monday. James and I will be here to talk about whatever's going on, but it won't be in the morning as usual. We'll be recording at some stage in mid to late afternoon. So it's probably going to be a Monday evening podcast. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, take it easy and we will catch you on the next one. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Arsenal Football Club today announced the departure of supposed forward Willie Williamson, just 1 year into a 3-year contract. The pint-sized stonker has been an absolute lemon in red and white and departs with only 72 of the 83 gold bars he was promised. Arsenal chairman Sir Kensington Fryer said, "Come on lads, let's have a party. Who's got a snow?" Honk!